Hey everybody, this is Beth Durinsky from Odyssey Insurance and Investments, and you're listening to the podcast, Real Insurance Made Simple. As a working mom of young kids and a small business owner, I know firsthand life happens. So come along with me and learn how your insurance policies work when real life happens and you need them most. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Real Insurance Made Simple. We are here with Matt Moore today. He is a local elder law attorney, and we want to, again, provide you guys with as much information as we can as it relates to your Medicare policies or life, just to try to help educate you on aging, retirement, and how that all works. So I'm going to let Matt run with it. Tell us a little bit about his business and himself and what he does.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, first of all. As you said, I'm a local attorney. I've been practicing law for about 18 years. I was born and raised in southeastern Indiana. I'm originally from Milan, Indiana. So went to high school in Milan, graduated. Ended up in Indianapolis for 10, 11 years practicing law, but decided to move back home and just love the area. I grew up here, decided to move back home 9 years ago now, and then started our practice here in Batesville about 3 years ago.
Nice.
Our firm is what I call a general practice firm, but my practice is generally geared towards elder law and estate planning. It's more of a what I call a estate planning with the need to be able to help people who are going into the nursing home or having some of the questions like you said about Medicare, Medicaid. That's what I focus primarily on day to day, but our firm does anything that anybody needs in the community right now. We are a general practice firm.
General practice. Okay, that is good to know as well. So we're going to kind of just start with the basics for those that may not know what you kind of hit on this, but what is an elder law attorney and what kind of advantages do people have by just meeting with you?
So an elder law attorney, in my opinion, is kind of mislabeled in some regards because I like to call it an estate planning attorney more.
Okay.
Because when you say an elder law attorney, that pegs it to say, oh, I have to be old to be able to need this attorney or go see this attorney.
Yeah.
And I think almost anybody can benefit from a good estate planning attorney. So I think anybody of any age should be looking at, do they have an estate plan? What kind of estate plan do they have? And what do they need? And I just had a client come in the other day. Her son is going to college and she wanted to get an estate plan in place for her 18-year-old son who is going to be going to college. And I think anybody who's over the age of 18 needs to think about those things because they don't understand that under the law, parents and spouses don't have automatic rights for each other. So if you have a bank account as an 18-year-old child and you don't have anybody on that bank account and you don't have good estate planning documents and something happens to you, you may not be able to access that bank account of that child.
Well, that's good to know. I think I need to do some estate planning.
And she had mentioned the story to me was for her healthcare document. She said she had worked with somebody who had a young child who had a medical event and the hospital wouldn't talk to the parents because that individual who was over 18 years of age had never signed a medical release.
Mm-hmm.
So elder law is primarily focused with somebody who's doing the more advanced estate planning, who is older, who is trying to get all their affairs in order. And that's what you think of on the estate or on the elder law side. Also probably more like we'll worry about nursing home care. How do we plan for that? What do we do to pre-plan for that? But again, I like to say I'm an estate planning attorney, not necessarily an elder law attorney, because I help everybody from, young kids all the way up to 100-year-old clients. So I don't like to be pigeonholed just as the estate planning or elder law attorney. I like to say it's more elder law is more just probably more advanced estate planning when somebody is getting ready to go to the nursing home, but also just trying to get their final affairs in order.
Okay, so that kind of my own question kind of pops up at that point.
Okay.
How often do people come to you because they're already in a nursing home and now they're scrambling, trying to get their affairs in order kind of in the rears?
That's probably the most common case we have for nursing home plan.
And how does that impact them? Like, as far as because as the agents, we hear all the time, there's a 5-year look back. They can't hide their assets or whatever. So what are some, I'm going to let you kind of run with this because I'm going to hit you with 2 or 3 questions back to back. but like, what kind of problems do you see? How does that impact them? Are there ways around that?
Sure.
Like, what is the best way to navigate those scenarios?
So the biggest problem I see when people come to me in that scenario is that they didn't have good documents in place beforehand. So if they don't have a good power of attorney, or they don't have their, medical power of attorneys in place, that's what causes us the most problems on the planning side. Because if we can't access the accounts, if we can't access assets, we have to go to court. We have to establish guardianships. We have to do a bunch of extra work and spend a bunch of extra money because they didn't plan to get basic good documents in place. As far as how does it impact them, if you have 5 years and you can plan 5 years in advance and you're willing to do that, that is the best way to try to preserve assets. But it also creates risk for a client. I always tell people, when someone comes in the door, this is like one of the conversations I have 5 times a week is, oh, I don't want, to lose everything. And I say, well, then you get to make a choice. Do you want to have control over your assets, or do you want to risk losing them? Because the 5-year look back, if you're trying to preserve those assets, you have to give up complete control. You cannot have any rights to those assets anymore. So a lot of people aren't comfortable saying, oh, I'm ready to give up my house, or I'm ready to give up my money to my kids at this point in time, because it could put them at risk if they don't have it and they need to move or they need it for whatever purposes. So it's kind of a balancing act. I'm generally a big proponent to say, if you're not 100% sure, keep control of your assets, because most of the time, the horror stories that people hear about nursing homes and the nursing homes taking everything, those are probably exaggerated. I don't see that in my practice. Most of the times with a couples case, we're able to preserve 90 to 100% of the money. So what I define as a couples case is married couples, one of them is at home, the other one ends up going to the nursing home. In most of those situations, we're able to preserve all of the assets for the at-home spouse. The Medicaid rules are actually pretty favorable in those scenarios to provide some relief. There are some issues that we have to work around, but most of the time we're not worried about losing the house, losing the farm, and that spouse at home losing everything. There are really good protections in place from Medicaid that allow that. They have what they call a spousal impoverishment rule, which is basically protecting against that happening. Where you see that happen is where someone goes to the nursing home and they don't contact the skilled attorney. I think nursing homes are very, very good. They want to help people, but they just don't know the rules, and sometimes they give really bad advice. And so that's that scenario. The other scenario we deal with a lot is what I call a singles case, which is somebody is either widowed or divorced, and then they end up going to the nursing home. And even in that scenario, we're able to save 50, 60% of the assets. So when you think about the planning wise, in one scenario, we can save almost everything. The other one, we're saving 50 or 60%. That makes it really hard for someone to say, well, I want to give up complete control of stuff 5 years prior to that. Some people do, some people don't, but I always say it's just a level of comfort for those people as to what do they want. I also think the type of assets make a difference. I always say if someone comes in, they have a family farm, and they have 200 acres that they've had in the family forever, and we know we're never going to sell it no matter what, well, that's one we can be a little bit more aggressive with, trying to get to that 5-year clock. Someone walks in the door and they have their house, maybe $100,000. Well, I don't really feel like giving that away because that's really all they have. And what if something does happen in their life and they need to move to an assisted living facility, or they need to go somewhere? How are they going to afford that otherwise if they got rid of everything? And so it's a very difficult question. That's the simple answer to a difficult question.
No, I love the answer though. So my brain went to a few different places. Obviously, it sounds like it's on a case-by-case scenario. What are the assets? What are the client situation? And that is why it is really best to speak to a professional like you and not let necessarily, again, like you said, not that the nursing homes are bad, but they don't specialize in what you do.
Absolutely. And, people say, well, I don't have much money. I look at clients that anybody who has anything is worth talking to an attorney who knows what they're going on, because even if you only have $5,000 to $10,000, if we can save, half of that money for your family, that's a pretty significant savings. So I don't think there's anybody who doesn't have enough to worry about doing that type of planning. I think every client is a good client in that sense, where we really work to make sure we're maximizing what we can save for the family. And if somebody only has $5,000 or $10,000, they may be a good client because they might need a little nest egg. So if they're going into a nursing home, what if they need hearing aids, or what if they need something that may not be covered by Medicaid or Medicare. Well, if we can put a little bit of money aside for them, it might give them those little comforts that the family or somebody else wouldn't be able to provide for them in the future.
Absolutely. So you said something and my brain went there, and I did not initially give this to you as a question. So if you don't know it off the top of your head, you can get back to me and we'll edit this later. I have heard of people going on Medicaid, and if they pass away in a nursing home, then Medicaid will make them sell their house to pay that back. How does that stipulate, and what does that look like?
So Medicaid has what they call an estate recovery program.
Okay.
Okay. And so what that means is that if somebody goes on to Medicaid, you do not have to sell the house initially to qualify for Medicaid. It's an exempt asset is what we call it.
Okay.
They are not allowed to do estate recovery against the spouse. So when we're talking about that couple situation again, so let's just say husband went into the nursing home, we put the house in wife's name, husband passes away, they're not allowed to come after the house for wife. It is never at risk in that scenario. So the only, again, scenario where we see that happening is when we're going to have the person in the nursing home is the owner of the house, and they may come after that.
Okay.
The rules just changed. It used to be there was no real clear-cut rules about how that would occur. Then a few years ago, they passed a law that said Medicaid has a 5-month window to open an estate and make a claim against the house.
Okay.
So they have a very strict deadline. If they don't do that, they are barred from coming after the house.
Okay.
There was a new statute that was just passed that goes into effect on July 1st, so here in a couple of days.
Okay.
That actually changes it. We think, again, we're waiting on some interpretation, that Medicaid's only going to have 120 days to make that claim.
Okay. Okay.
In my practice, I've only had Medicaid make that claim one time.
Okay. Oh, see,
so it's not common.
Statistics are low for that, so the probability.
Very, very low statistically speaking.
Okay. But possible, necessarily probable.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay. Okay. That is good to know. I just, as you were talking, Michael, my brain's jumping here, which is why I brought my notepad, because I don't want to forget my questions, because you have a lot of good points. So we kind of hit on the next two. You can start this at any time. You encourage it obviously earlier because it allows people to get their ducks in a row. What do you feel about long-term care insurance and how that helps clients through those nursing home situations?
It depends on the policy. There are some really good policies out there, and there's some really poor policies out there. I think if you are looking to just get something that covers $50 to $75 a day, I've never seen that make a real big difference on my planning or where it's helped us significantly. The policies I like on the long-term care insurance would be something more like you have a life policy that has a long-term care rider.
Okay.
That's just something where I feel like you're not losing that benefit if you don't end up in the nursing home.
Yeah.
So that's what I would generally say is more favorable to our clients, because it just gives more versatility. I see a lot of people who have these, what I call smaller long-term care policies, and they really don't help us, and they don't really save the clients that much money. And then they spend all this money for something that,
because long-term care is expensive.
It's very expensive.
So in summary, I'm sure there's some exceptions to this rule that I'm about to say. The standalone long-term care policies aren't usually as beneficial as the long-term care riders on the life policies, because that way it's not a use it or lose it benefit. At least it's going on to the family if they don't use
I think that's an accurate statement. Yes.
Fair enough. And I'm sure, because I know how I feel about family members being involved in the Medicare process, it helps. How does it look for you guys when family members get involved, children? Do you encourage that? Is that helpful?
I generally encourage, especially when we're talking about a 5-year plan where we're thinking about transferring assets to kids and things, I definitely think the kids have to be involved in that process. And I like to meet the kids. I like to have a conversation. I just like to read the room a little bit to see, do I think the kids truly have their parents' best interests in heart? How do they approach this meeting? Because that's a very dangerous thing when you're turning stuff over to kids. Well, if they're not doing the right thing, we could have a big problem. So we want to make sure that we have the kids involved. I think once you get to a certain point, it's really good to have the kids involved. You asked me what problems were earlier. One of the biggest problems I think kids have, or even spouses have, is lack of information.
Yes.
And so, mom and dad have been taking care of everything, and then they have a major event, and the kids have no idea what's going on in their life, and they're trying to sort out all these, where does mom have this, or where does dad have this, and they have no clue. And so again, it's a personal decision for the client. But if you have a child that you trust, that you like, it's hard to talk about those things. But if you get along with them and you don't think they're going to do anything wrong, it's good to get them involved in some of these planning decisions, or at least bring them into, this is what we're doing, this is where we have our assets, or this is where our documents are, at least.
Yes.
So that they have a plan if something does.
Yes, I agree. We do have children that come back to us and say, well, why did mom pick this plan, or what does this cover? So it's helpful when they are involved, because they usually are the ones taking over.
And for my planning purposes, a lot of times kids will come in and say, well, why didn't you get those things 5 years ago? And I'd say, well, we had that conversation, but mom and dad didn't really want to give up ownership of their stuff. And here was the pros and cons, here's why. And it's helpful if you have that conversation at the beginning, because if client was involved and they had their kids involved early, the kids can come back and say, yeah, I remember we talked about that, and here was the situation. Oh, okay, I remember that. It just is very helpful if the kids are involved. It has to be the right family circumstances, obviously.
Yes. Family dynamics.
Family dynamics.
A very big role in that. I agree. So we deal a lot with clients choosing what they want, Advantage versus Supplement, which for the most part, they're overall very happy with it until it comes nursing home time. And then children get very upset with us because they didn't realize what mom and dad picked, because the plan may or may not be great for the nursing home. So that's why I ask. And that's why I feel like the more knowledge we can provide them, and we can say, hey, like, let's look at this beforehand. We did a interview with the nursing home director, and now with you, to try to educate them before that.
Absolutely.
I think education and knowledge is power. So I do think that is super beneficial.
And I think clients are confused sometimes because, parents are choosing something that might be more economically affordable to them, like an Advantage plan, but that doesn't give them as many of the nursing home benefits that they want, or maybe more strict on some of those guidelines. Well, the kids aren't in the decision-making process, and it makes it a very difficult scenario for them. But mom and dad may have financially wanted that because of their financial circumstances. So yeah, absolutely. If they're involved in that process, it helps a lot, because then they at least know the thinking of mom and dad.
100%. So the perception that we kind of get, I know you say estate, when we initially put this together, was elder law, is that people are seeing an elder law attorney to get Medicaid. Is that necessarily the case?
I think that is yes and no. I think a lot of people come and see me in that situation where you said, which is, we've had the emergency. Someone is going to the nursing home. What do we do? How do we manage this? How do we get through this process? That's probably 50 to 60% of the clients we see. The other group is just trying to be proactive and say, okay, we just need to make sure we have everything in line. Do we have a good will? Do we have a good, power of attorney? Do we need a trust? Do we not need a trust? What are the advantages of that? That's the other, 40% of it, is just trying to be proactive so that they have good documents in place for when something does happen to them. So I think not everybody that comes to see us is, oh, we're going to the nursing home right now. Like, a lot of them are just trying to get in their affairs in order, so if something does happen, makes it easier on the kids.
So, and probably those 40%, their goal is not to be on Medicaid eventually, but eventually to put, maybe it is, maybe it's not. Medicaid's not necessarily the goal of the meeting.
Correct.
Is the point. There are multiple goals depending on their situation and status.
Exactly right.
Okay. Let's see. What are the thresholds to make someone eligible for Medicaid? Is this
a loaded question?
I know I got a few bullet points under that.
So,
and I know you alluded to the fact that one thing already changed, just like the July 1st ruling. So
that's a very difficult question, because it's kind of a moving target. It goes case by case. For a single individual, the threshold is $2,000 of countable assets. So not everything they own is countable.
So there's a difference.
So, for example, one of the most confusing points that I deal with all the time is the house. The house is not a countable asset. It is an exempt asset. So for a single person to go on Medicaid, their house doesn't count towards the $2,000 limit. As long as they do certain things with it. Okay. So other exempt assets are like funeral plans, vehicles, and other income producing real estate. So for example, you could have a house
Mm-hmm.
and a farm that you cash rent, and neither one of those assets would count towards that $2,000 asset limit.
That's interesting.
So,
Good to know.
so the most common thing we're dealing with is cash or investment accounts. The one that people forget about all the time would be cash value of life insurance policies.
Okay.
So people come into me, we think it's real easy, and then they say, oh, I have a life insurance policy. And they have a $50,000 life insurance policy, but the cash value is $13,000. For Medicaid purposes, we have a $13,000 in the bank, but in reality, we have a $50,000 asset. And so that's where a lot of the complicated planning comes in.
Okay.
And what I see bad advice all the time is people will listen to somebody else, or even facilities will tell them, I'll take that policy and turn it over to the funeral home. Well, if you take a life insurance policy and turn it over to the funeral home, you just now have a $50,000 funeral, because if you don't use it for the funeral by law, you have to return that money to the state of Indiana.
Sorry.
Yeah, fine. So that's one of the most common problems that we have to work around. And that's where I think working with somebody who really knows these rules and can work through and say, oh, what are our other options, is imperative for that.
Okay.
The second case is those couples cases. And so that's the nursing home where one person is at home and one person is in the facility. That is a moving target, because they value assets on the day that the person who needs Medicaid is away from home for 30 consecutive days for the first time in their life.
Okay.
So it could be dad had knee surgery 5 years ago and he went to rehab for 90 days. Well, when he went in to have that knee surgery, we got to value the assets on that day. Or it could be, the most recent event where they had a major medical event, went to the hospital. But that is our starting point for our evaluation. That then sets their limits of what they can have, because we have to start with the starting date, get the countable assets again, and they have to spend down to half of those countable assets in order to go into a facility.
Okay.
So it's a moving target on those cases.
So I had two questions that came out of that answer. The first one's very simple. One of the myths maybe is you can only have one vehicle set.
No.
No.
So anything over one vehicle would just count towards your countable assets.
Okay.
So for the couples, if they have two cars and they're allowed to have $75,000 worth of assets based on those numbers, their second vehicle may be valued at $10,000. They can keep that value. It just counts towards that $75,000.
Just one's exempt from
just
the count.
One is exempt.
Okay. My second question was going to allude to the Medicaid spin down. Is that where you kind of go back to, we can save a portion of the assets and not some of them, because you have to spend some of those down in order?
And so on a singles case, you're really talking about saving 50% of the assets for a spin down. For a couple, the spin down is actually kind of unique in that Indiana gives us a couple options where a spin down doesn't really truly result in a complete spin down. So some people think, you heard me say, you have to spend half your assets. Well, we don't really have to spend them on something. We just have to get them out of your name in a legal manner.
Yes.
So you said a word earlier, it was hide assets. I never used the word hide.
I'm not attorney for a reason.
I always use the word properly plan. We're going to plan for assets.
Yes.
But let me give you an easy scenario. Let's just say husband and wife, husband has a major medical event. At the time he goes in, they had $100,000. From a Medicaid standpoint, we have to spend them down to $50,000.
Okay.
And let's say they have one kid who is very trustworthy. They enjoy, no issues with that child. We could actually loan that child $50,000.
Oh.
And that counts as their Medicaid spend down. So in the long run, that client never ended up having to spend their money. Their child has it through a loan. And that loan process actually can repay mom that $50,000 over a period of time. So in the end, mom ends up with all of her money back, even though we had to do a spend down.
Oh, what?
Whereas
okay.
People get bad advice and they go out and buy a new car, or they go out and buy a bunch of funerals, or they go out and spend money that they can't get back. And they didn't know that this other option existed.
Oh, I see. That's very creative in a way of using the legal system and the law to your benefit. Again, I'm not an attorney, so don't take what I say. Don't take my terminology.
But I think that's why it's important for people to actually work with somebody who knows all the options rather than somebody who may be limited on what they practice. And that's where a good elder law attorney comes in.
Yes, yes. No, I love that. And I think these are super important conversations to have for the people who are getting to that point. And even for myself, I'm sitting here thinking about ways that like my husband and I need to plan accordingly with this business since we've opened this.
Yep.
And then we have 2 little kids, one on the way. We've got things that we need to do based on just a few things that you said. And obviously we're nowhere near at 65.
Yep.
So I love that. I do want to clarify really quickly. We're throwing out a lot of terminology. I do Medicare, but we're also referencing Medicaid.
Absolutely.
Medicaid is a state-funded, income-based program based on your income and your assets that you may or may not qualify for, and you can correct me on any terminology I use.
That's correct.
And then Medicare is a beneficiary program that you pay into while you're working. I've went through some of those different aspects of Medicare in previous episodes on the podcast, Real Insurance Made Simple, but it is a program that you get when you turn 65. So there is the distinguishing factors. They are 2 separate programs and something to be aware of. Do you have anything you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, I think the main confusion is they sound very similar, right? Medicare and Medicaid.
Yes.
And I think you elaborated very nicely that Medicare is this federally based program.
Yes.
Medicaid is a state-based program. So Medicaid rules vary state to state, whereas Medicare is a federal system. A lot of people come into my office and think that once they get Medicaid, they no longer are able to receive Medicare. And that's a common misconception. Whenever you get Medicaid, you don't lose your Medicare benefits. You just add Medicaid on, and they're both in their simplest forms are just insurance programs.
Yeah.
And they just cover different types of assets or different types of scenarios. I say Medicare is generally for hospitals, doctors, prescription drugs. Medicaid is to fill in those gaps and maybe, pay some of those copays. Where I see it a lot is for people who are needing extra help for prescription drug costs or for, paying those Medicare premiums or doctors' copays. It's also for the long-term care. Or one of the misconceptions too is we're talking a lot about nursing home. Medicaid also covers what we call waiver programs, which are in-home benefits that clients can receive. So right now the waiver programs got a wait list, but generally when the waiver program is working, Medicaid can step in and have somebody come out to the house and help care for your loved one at home.
Oh, okay.
And it's paying for those services through Medicaid, which Medicare doesn't offer.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's huge, huge, huge. Because we have plans. Obviously, we're aware that Medicare and Medicaid can work together. There are different doctors that accept different from our standpoint. And then there are also the Advantage plans that specialize, the dual special needs plans for people who are Medicare and Medicaid eligible, which even gives them some extra benefits. But to know that they have those waiver programs and even more outside of that is, again, another benefit.
Benefits to add some options.
Yes. Okay. Do you see the Medicaid thresholds changing every year, or how? And does that make it a moving target year over year for your clients?
Yes. So the 2,000 limit has been pretty consistent for a while. It used to be $1,500. They moved it up to $2,000 a while ago. That threshold does not change year to year. For the couples, I kind of gave a very generic summary, which was have the assets, spend down half of it. There's a floor and a ceiling to that.
Okay.
So, for some situations, you don't have to spend half. For some situations, you have to spend more than half. Those thresholds change every year.
Okay.
And so they go up based on the poverty limits. And so those are kind of a moving target that change every year, but they're pretty consistent around the floor is around $30,000 every year. So if that scenario, a couple has less than 30,000, you don't have to spend down anything.
Okay.
The ceiling's been around 150. And so if the couple has more than 150, you have to spend them down to less than 150. So.
Okay. So in those scenarios when those it is a moving target, do you just do like annual reviews with your clients, or do you track that, or is that up to them?
So those thresholds don't change once you are on Medicaid.
Oh. Okay.
So once a couple is on Medicaid, they're on, and then the strict $2,000 limit is applied to everybody. So generally, everybody once we get them to Medicaid, it's looking at their assets, making sure they're below that $2,000 limit is the only threshold that they have to do. And so again, that hasn't changed in so long. And if anything, it would go up, it won't go down.
Okay. So they don't have to like set up an annual
Yep.
review with you. Just it's the initial
Yep.
getting everything in place.
Medicaid does do on a yearly basis what's called an annual review program. And if any changes they have, usually they would outline it in that to the client.
And the client just does that on their own, mails it back in.
Some clients want us to do it. Some clients do it on their own. So it depends. Yeah. A lot of times I recommend to all clients, calling us on a yearly basis is not a bad thing.
Okay.
Even somebody who's done their estate plan, they're 65 years old, they don't need anything for probably the next 10 years or so. Calling us every couple of years and just checking on rule changes is very important, because I don't know how to contact every one of my clients anytime a rule changes. That'd be a pretty exhausting list.
Yeah.
But if you call me, I can say, oh yeah, there's nothing that's changed. There's no major law changes. You're okay. And it's a quick 5-minute phone call that we're happy to provide to our clients to make sure they're comfortable. So it's better for the clients to be a little proactive on calling us every year.
I could totally, so it like prompts you to pull up their account, do a quick review rather than trying to shuffle through every client you have, because that's not really realistic. I get that from my perspective too. Correct. Okay, that's awesome. So do you have any organizations locally who would be a good resource for the aging generation or that generation?
So everything's kind of in a state of flux right now, because it used to be Thrive Alliance in Greensburg and Lifetime Resources in Dillsboro were probably two of the best resources we had around that work really, really well with people. Medicaid is changing how they're administering all of their programs.
Okay.
And that actually goes into effect July 1. And so this managed healthcare program is changing, and I'm not sure how it's all going to shake out. So for right now, those are the best resources I can give to people. But what is essentially happening is Medicaid has elected to allow private insurance, United Healthcare, Anthem, and I think Humana is the third one, to take over a lot of these programs that they have managing. Whereas it used to be Medicaid managed them with the assistance of like Lifetime and Thrive.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what's going to happen with all those programs. That's one that probably check with me in 6 months, and I might have better.
We'll do another one of these in 6 months.
But those would be the starting places right now. Those area agencies on aging, or the local AAA offices, we call them, are the best resources right now. They're very knowledgeable. They're very skilled. They have lots of different resources. And I think they will still serve a role. So that's the best place I would go to right now.
Okay. I know that we're getting notifications. There's not a lot of information for us that with our carriers, our private carriers, like some that you mentioned, saying, hey, we were approved in the state of Indiana for this. And that's new for us too. So there's going to be that learning curve.
There's a lot of changes coming in the next few months.
Yeah. Changes may be good. Changes may be bad. We'll regroup in 6 months and see how they do. Do you, and we kind of hit on this as well. Do you have any advice for parents on how to plan for a trust or a will for their young children under 18? Any examples that you can give that may benefit?
So I think anybody over the age of 18 should seriously consider at least having some basic documents in place. They're very simple, that you can have something, but we never know what's going to happen. And if you don't have something in place, it causes a problem. I think parents who have kids should especially consider having documents in place. The reason why I always say is people don't want to plan for it. People don't want to think about it. But if this comes to life, your kids are dealing with the absolute worst case scenario they could ever imagine, that you have died and their caregivers and the people who are the most important people in their life are gone. And if you don't have any planning in place, what's going to happen is the courts will get involved, number one, and create your plan for you, which is never the best solution. Courts do a wonderful job of a lot of things, but we don't want them doing our estate planning.
No.
But the courts will follow the law, and they will be forced to do that plan. Then the second thing that's going to happen is your kids are most likely going to get all your assets at age 18. So you're running through this scenario where kids have lost mom and dad, probably have a lot of, emotional trauma or issues that they've been through. And then we're going to give them all this money at age 18. I don't think that's realistic to expect good decisions with that money.
I wasn't making good decisions at 18.
I was a good kid and I didn't make good decisions.
Yeah.
So I think most of the time you're really dealing with a scenario that if you don't do it, it's just the law is not best equipped to do it for you. So anybody who has little kids, I think putting a trust together that says we're going to put somebody else in charge of this money and wait till the kids reach some certain thresholds or certain ages. Now, that doesn't mean that the money can't be used for certain things before they reach those ages. It just means that somebody else is stepping into that role to make those decisions.
Okay.
So the example I always give is, say we have a scenario where you go, I want my kids to be able to get their money at age 25, 30, and 35. So they're going to get it at 3 different ages. Child goes out, and at age 22, they want to buy a house. And they've graduated college, they have a great job, everything's going well, they just need some help with a down payment. And you've named a family member to be the trustee.
Okay.
That trustee could absolutely say, yeah, here's your money for your down payment. They could help them do that.
Okay.
So we can help them, even though the trust says they don't get money until 25. We can design it the way it's flexible where the trustee can make that decision.
Okay. I like
But
that.
at the same token, that kid comes and says, well, I got a job, I just graduated college, and I want to go buy a Ferrari. The trustee can say, no, I'm not going to give you the money for your Ferrari. Wait till you get your own money. So trust can be flexible enough to deal with that, but also put a good person in place that can be decision-making. I always say, replace you on the money-making decision, because it'd be the same way if your kid came to you when you were older and said, Mom, Dad, can you let me borrow some money for a down payment? You could say yes, or you could say no.
Right.
We're just replacing you with somebody else.
In case you're not there.
In case you're not there.
I love that. I love that. So just a couple more things.
Yep.
Do you only practice in Indiana? Do you practice it? Okay.
Only licensed in Indiana. Our firm can only practice in Indiana. We're all Indiana-based attorneys. So,
okay. Yeah. And then do you have anything that you want to provide people on where they can find you, how they can reach you? Obviously, I can put your contact information on my in the show notes.
We have a website, so obviously that's always the best place to go. Really is go to the website. It has our phone number on there. You can text our phone number, or you can do an info email. So you get back to us. We usually try to get back to people within 24 hours, 1 business day. So whatever you do, phone, we're still old school, I guess.
I love a phone call.
Generally, the other part of it is we're really busy. So a lot of times, unfortunately, you may have to wait a week or 2 to come in and see us, but it's really hard for me to gauge and help somebody over a 5-minute phone call. I generally think that if you want to get help, it's worth making the investment to come in and talk to one of our attorneys, to spend an hour, hour and a half with us. Let us get to know you, get to know us, and let us know what's really going on in your life so that we can gauge and figure out how we can help you the best way possible.
Okay. And this is something I kind of want to just, I guess, pick your brain on or see your take on it, because I know sometimes I have to ask some pretty personal questions, and people don't like that, but it's not because you're trying to pry. It's that in order for you to do your job efficiently, it's easier for you to know the full picture. And obviously they have that attorney-client privilege. You're not,
absolutely.
That is completely confidential, all of that stuff.
And some people are really, I have different types of clients, obviously. Some people come in, they'll list everything they have, and it's like an open book. And I'm like, these people never met me and they're giving me everything. Some people come in and don't give you anything at first. You kind of have to talk to them. You have to kind of explain it. And a lot of times in that situation, you build that rapport with them, you build that trust with them, and say, well, here's all the options we're going to talk about. Here's what we're going to look at. A lot of things I do a lot of times is like, I try to tell people what I'm going to look for before I look for it. So if you bring an old will to me, or you bring an old power of attorney, I'm going to say, this is what I'm going to look for this. And these are the things I'm going to try to trigger. Then I'm going to look at it so that when I find something wrong, it wasn't like, oh, I just found something wrong because I want you to review this. No, I told you before I even looked at it what I'm going to be, what the key components of this are. And I think that builds trust with the clients to know I'm not just trying to find something to, bill you for or make money for, which attorneys get a bad rap for. I think I'm trying to give you an honest opinion. And there's so many times, if you can ask my staff and ask former clients, there's so many times people come into our office and I talk them out of things. So a common example, someone comes in, oh, I want to trust. Well, they have one kid, the kid's really good. And I'm like, well, why do you need a trust? Well, I just want to make it really easy. I'm like, just name them as beneficiary on everything. You can save your money with me, and your kid's going to get everything outside of probate anyways.
Yeah.
You ended up saving money. So a lot of times I talk clients out of things that they think they need, because I don't look at it as, I'm not trying to build a client just to build a client. I'm trying to do a service for the client and give them what they need to help their scenario. That's the most important thing for me, even if that means less fees for us.
Yes.
That's what we preach at our firm.
I love that 100%, because I can't tell you the number of times I say, you are not best served here, not because I don't want to sell you this policy, or I don't want to offer this to you. I'll help you and sell you whatever you want. But I think what you have right now is better, even though it's not with me.
Absolutely.
So I love that motto, and I love working with people in the community who have that same motto and share those same morals with us. So unless you have anything for me, Matt, I think that pretty much gives our client, mutual people in the community, a good quick overview on this.
Absolutely. And if anybody wants to reach out to us, just give the office a call, 812-932-1227. The office number. Feel free to call with any questions. We'll be happy to help.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you all for listening today. We hope you found this episode helpful and informative as you navigate the world of insurance. As a reminder, this podcast is never for legal or professional advice, and you should always consult your local and licensed insurance professional. We wish you a week filled with love and blessings from the team at Odyssey Insurance and Investment.